Hey there, 8th graders. Welcome to today's lesson. I am so glad you're joining me. If you really think about it, your life in middle school and your walk as a Christian actually have something massive in common. They are both this ongoing, super exciting work in progress. You're constantly growing, constantly learning, and honestly, constantly leveling up. So in today's explainer, we're going to look really closely at what it actually takes to level up your faith. We're talking about how you think, how you treat other people, and how you handle those everyday challenges that inevitably top up. All right, let's dive right in. So everything starts right up in your brain, right? Before you do anything, you have to think about it. Which brings me to a question I want to ask you directly. What does it actually mean to renew your mind? I know, it sounds like this huge, complicated theological concept, but I promise it's incredibly practical. Renewing your mind literally just means letting God's truth completely change the way you think. And here's the kicker. If you change how you think, you completely change how you live. And seeing these two mindsets side by side perfectly illustrates why that mental shift is absolutely crucial. Because look, the world around us is constantly pushing a mindset that's selfish, proud, rebellious, and, well, sinful. It's this whole me first, no matter what attitude. But when you let God's truth step in and transform you, when you set your mind on the Spirit, it leads directly to life, peace, obedience, and real holiness. You're essentially taking a broken, glitchy operating system and swapping it out for a totally perfect one. All right, let's move into section 1, using gifts and loving enemies. So now that your mind is being renewed, how does that actually change how you interact with the world around you? Well, let's talk about your talents first. God gives believers very specific, unique gifts. Maybe you're a fantastic speaker, or a really talented musician, or just an incredibly compassionate friend. But here's the absolutely crucial thing to remember. God gives you those gifts so you can serve Him, strengthen the church, help others, and live to please the Father. They definitely aren't there for you to show off or try to compete with your classmates. Our spiritual gifts should never make us proud, because at the end of the day, every single gift is exactly that, a gift. It's a direct result of God's grace. Okay, but what about applying this to the really tough parts of middle school, like, say, dealing with enemies or bullies? The world is going to tell you to get revenge, right? To give them a taste of their own medicine. Someone insults you, you insult them back, but way harder. But God's way, it's radically different. Loving your enemies means you actively choose mercy, patience, prayer, and self-control instead of revenge. And honestly, it takes way more inner strength to refuse to become evil in response to evil than it does to just blindly strike back. Now, I want to be super clear on something here. Showing mercy to someone who's giving you a hard time absolutely does not mean you're suddenly agreeing with their bad behavior. Not at all. You can love an enemy by refusing revenge and actually praying for them while still speaking the truth with total humility. Scripture commands us to abhor, which means to deeply, deeply hate what is evil and cling tightly to what is good. So remember, you never, ever have to approve of evil to show God's love. Which brings us nicely to section 2, honoring rightful authority. So how exactly are we supposed to deal with the rules and all the people placed in charge of us? We're talking parents, teachers, coaches. Look, I know it can feel pretty frustrating sometimes having to follow so many rules, right? But believers are actually called to respect rightful human authority for a very specific reason. God values order, justice, peace, and responsible living. Think about trying to play a basketball game without a referee, or driving through a huge intersection with no traffic lights. Just total chaos, right? Authority is put there to create a peaceful, just environment where we can all actually thrive. That being said, there is one ultimate rule you always have to keep in mind. God is the highest authority, always. If a human authority ever commands you to do something that directly disobeys God, you have to obey God rather than men, period. But even when you have to take that stand, you still do it with humility, a lot of courage, wisdom, and a deep reverence for God. All right, up next, section 3, bearing with the weak. Let's shift gears a bit and look at how we treat each other right inside our own Christian community. The Apostle Paul talks about this a ton in Romans 14 and 15. But first, let's quickly define what we're actually talking about here, because we definitely aren't talking about physical weakness. A weak believer is simply a fellow Christian who is still growing in their understanding, their faith, and their obedience. Think of it kind of like being at the gym. If you've got a friend who's just starting out and they can't lift a really heavy weight yet, you don't make fun of them or let the weight drop on them, right? You spot them, you help them lift it. As stronger believers, we're called to be patient, loving, and helpful to those who are still out there building up their spiritual muscles. Back in Paul's day, some believers had totally different personal convictions about stuff like what foods were okay to eat or which specific days were special holidays. These were what they called doubtful things, basically issues of personal conscience, not strict black and white biblical commands. And God does not want his children despising each other or arguing carelessly or tearing each other down over those personal differences. We really shouldn't be putting a stumbling block in a fellow believer's way, because ultimately, every single one of us is going to give an account to God. So how do we practically bear with the weak in everyday life? Well, here is a quick action plan for you. Step 1, use your strength to serve and encourage them. Step 2, teach them in truth and love. And step 3, when correction is actually needed, do it with absolute humility. Now, please notice that bearing with the weak never means approving of a sin or just ignoring God's commands. It just means using godly patience to help other people grow toward righteousness. Actually, our memory verse for the day from Romans 15:1 sums this up perfectly. It says, "We then, who are strong, ought to bear with the scruples of the weak, and not to please ourselves." So if you're feeling strong in your faith right now, that strength isn't there for you to brag about. You ought to bear with the scruples, which basically means the weaknesses or hesitations of the weak, and not just live to please yourself. Your spiritual strength is a tool meant for building up the church. And to back that up, Romans 14:19 reinforces this whole idea beautifully. Therefore, let us pursue the things which make for peace and the things by which one may edify another. We are called to actively pursue things that create peace and things that edify, which just means to build up one another. When we do that and we actually rely on God's grace and his Spirit, we end up living together in a way that truly, genuinely glorifies God. Now, if you're ever wondering what this actually looks like in real, everyday life, you just have to look at Jesus. I mean, he is our ultimate example. He literally had all the power and strength in the entire universe. And yet, he didn't live selfishly. He lived completely to please the Father and to serve other people. Following his perfect example of humility, love, and truth, that is the absolute blueprint for this work-in-progress salvation of ours. And finally, Section 4, the Godly Learner Philosophy. So let's tie all of these incredible biblical commands right back to your role today as an 8th grader at HeroesMart Academy. How does all this actually fit into your education? Well, there's a reason we purposely intertwine biblical morality with your education here, and it's a massive one. Education without morality can actually hurt. Think about it. If you become incredibly smart, but you completely lack a moral compass, that intelligence can be really misused. The goal here isn't just to make you more capable. It's to ensure your knowledge and your intelligence actually help you make wise, righteous, God-honoring choices out there in the real world. Which brings us right back to where we started, perfectly anchored in Romans chapter 8. Keeping the mind spiritually minded leads to life and peace. So as a godly learner, we absolutely want you to aggressively pursue academic excellence, get the absolute best grades, and learn everything you possibly can. But, and this is the key, we want you to do all of that while keeping your mind totally centered on God, on truth, and on wisdom. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought and challenge for the day. You are a work in progress, and you have been given these incredible gifts, a sound mind, and a whole community around you to build up. So how will you use your knowledge to honor God today? I really want you to think about that as you walk into your next class, as you're hanging out with your friends, and as you just keep leveling up in your faith. Thanks so much for joining me for this lesson, and I'll catch you next time.